Prisca continues telling us of the trial of Saul in the Forum in Corinth. At this point, Gallio, the governor, has ordered Paul to be cut loose and swept out of the Forum. But the crowd is still there. Prisca notes, all at once, Apelles the shoemaker launched himself. He leaped past me, over the rail, and onto the platform. I saw a round-edged knife in his left hand. With one stroke, he cut the rope that held Paul's hands. Then, whirling round to the right, he struck Sosthenes in the cheek with a backward crack of his elbow. Sosthenes stiffened. He opened his mouth, but a second hit to the side of his head sent him tumbling down into the space between the platform and the bema, and then the great storm broke. Men surged forward, breaking the railing and swarming the platform. They plunged down where Sosthenes had fallen, swinging and screaming in animal anger. They formed a wall, a circle, concealing their violence. The 9 men of the synagogue had vanished. I stood with my hands over my ears, waiting for my blood kin, my fellow Jew. But then, louder than the multitude, piercing my hands, my ears, even my head, cutting the air like a knife blade, came the high cry of a single voice. Me! It sang on one note, snapping like a banner under heaven. Hit me! I knew that voice, nasal, whining, outcrying, every other sound. The voice belonged to Paul. And all of this happened in a twinkling. I saw Paul on the bema, at the front edge of the bema, just before he leaped. I watched as he threw himself down into the violence and was swallowed up. And I began to run. I climbed the steps in front of me. I drove myself forward through people and over people until I could see down into that stone pit between the platform and the bema, at the bottom of which was Sosthenes, unconscious. But there too was Paul. Paul, my Paul, had stretched his body belly up over Sosthenes, his arms flung wide to cover the other completely. Between me and Paul, there crouched the shoemaker Apelles, the knife in his left hand, cocked, ready to drop and slash. Paul was looking straight at the shoemaker, pleading with him. Me, hit me, Apelles. Hit me instead of him. Give me the reason, Apelles barked. Fight me. Paul said no. Take a swing at me, Apelles yelled. Paul said, I can't, I won't. Suddenly, Apelles drew back his right hand and struck Paul in the mouth, crying, Fight me, fight me. I gasped. Paul squeezed his eyes shut for an instant, then looked up again at Apelles. He nodded as if with enormous pity. It's okay, he said. Blood threaded the lines between his teeth. Apelles, don't be afraid. The shoemaker screamed into Paul's face. Fight me, you bastard! Stand up for yourself! Paul didn't move. The ropes, like bracelets, still circled his wrists. It's okay, he said. Everything is okay. Apelles lunged. It was a false start. With a yell then, and with redoubled force, he struck Paul in the forehead, splitting skin to the white bone. I started to sob. No one else made a sound. Paul's eyes were closed. Apelles screamed. Spineless Jew! Suddenly the wound filled up and overflowed with blood. Blood poured over Paul's brow and into his hair. He opened his eyes. He didn't move his arms. He blinked several times and focused on Apelles and cleared his throat and smiled. "Don't worry," he said in his nasal voice. "Everything is okay because I love you." Apelles recoiled as if stung. "What did you say?" "Don't say that." "There's no reason for you to be afraid of me, Apelles, because I love you." The shoemaker threw his weight forward. He brought down the knife in his left hand, pressing the edge against Paul's throat and whispering, "I am not afraid." Whimpering, "I am not afraid, because who can kill who here?" "Only God can kill," Paul said. "But God knows your name, Apelles. God is calling you by name. He's speaking to you through me." Now Paul lifted his head. He raised himself, his thin chest to his elbows, causing the shoemaker to take the knife backward, causing the blood to rain forward down his own face, causing Sosthenes to stir beneath him. Paul spoke dead level to Apelles. He said, "It is God who speaks. It is God who says, 'I love you, Apelles. I've loved you your whole life long.'" A perfect stillness fell upon the world. I was not sobbing. I was holding my breath. But then I heard a grievous moaning. Ooh, ooh. It was Apelles the shoemaker, rocking back on his heels. His lip was trembling. His whole expression had crashed. Ooh, ooh. Paul said, "Be at peace, Apelles, beloved of God. There's no reason to be afraid." Because he was afraid. I too saw the fear in the shoemaker's eyes. Ooh, he wept. He stood up. No one pressed upon him anymore. People had fallen away. He dropped the curved knife and began to walk backward over the platform. He turned and went into the forum, northward, moaning as he went. And so the storm was over. No, but the storm had been over. I just hadn't noticed. The crowds had dispersed. People moved through the marketplace in the regular boil of business again. Merchants and soldiers and children running. The masons made their hammers ring on rock. Shop doors were open. Dogs pawed through the trash of the people, crumbs of bread, dusty meat, grains of salt on the ground. And here was Aquila, quietly standing behind me. How long had he been there? I gestured toward the pit between the bema and the platform. Aquila nodded. We stepped down and knelt beside Paul and Sosthenes, two men wounded and leaning against each other. Sosthenes was confused. His tight, neat hair glistened with mud and sweat and blood. It was Paul's blood, though I don't think Sosthenes knew who held him now, whose arms embraced him, whose cheek was by his cheek. The fountain from Paul's forehead had laced both men's faces in red. "Here," I said. While Aquila took Sosthenes' elbows and heaved him to his feet, I untied the precious linen cloth from round my neck and handed it to Paul. "Here, use this," I said. He gave the cloth 2 folds and bent his head and laid it to his wound. Aquila led Sosthenes like a drunken man away. Paul sighed. Priscilla, he whispered, "my little Prisca, how good it is to see you again, but I knew you would be here." Then he raised his eyes to me and began to chuckle, a cockeyed grin. "The reason I didn't lie face down on Sosthenes," he said, "is that I'm tired of getting beat on the back. My back can't take much more. I thought I'd offer the Smiters a fresh part of my flesh. But look, he chuckled. He removed the linen and brought his forehead within inches of my sight. Priscilla, look and tell me. Didn't the shoemaker pop that old scar open again, the same old scar?